Make sure that's working. We're live. Welcome back to Tailosive Tech live on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen. We have it today, confirmation from Apple themselves. It was kind of to be expected. June 6th was a fairly predictable date for quadruple UDC. Apple seems to not be changing up tradition in ensuring that the developers conference is held on the first Monday of June, which this year did fall on the 6th. Although, one thing I didn't really touch on much in my video that I put out so quickly, just because I was so excited about all the potential with the software and what this event may have in store for us. But aside of that is Apple will be inviting a few people, a few developers, although Apple said availability will be limited, to Apple Park to essentially watch the online event. So there was a lot of speculation going on. Is 2022 going to be the year that Apple goes back to in-person events? Should they go back to in-person events even if the pandemic isn't as big as an issue as it used to be? Regardless of can they, should they? I personally fell into the camp that I think the online events that are virtual are far more fun to watch. I think they're far more well done. I find them more entertaining than just watching someone walk up on a stage and kind of just go back and forth with a PowerPoint presentation. I think that they get to be far more creative with the virtual events, and I think it's probably cheaper for them to just work with the marketing team to do a bunch of drone shots and impressive cinematography and use CGI to demonstrate all their stuff rather than rent out a giant venue that thousands of people have to show up to. Now Apple seems to want to kind of do some developers show up in person, but they're still watching the same event that we're going to be watching. And also, because this is being held at Apple Park, it's not going to be nearly as many people that were at the last in-person quadruple UDC, which I believe was 2019. At those, they typically had somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 people show up, and they would crowd that gymnasium full of people and then have, Apple executives walk up on stage. I don't think in today's era we need that as much anymore, especially after the 2019 one where Apple had to react to the audience gasping about the $1,000 Pro stand, and they had to deal with the mistakes that are made in the demo, whether it's Craig Federighi going, oh, let's go to backup here. There's so much potential room for error whenever you do something live, and there's probably a bit more excitement in that, and people are kind of hopeful that maybe there is a mistake, and that's what makes it real, that's what makes it feel genuine. But I don't think actually Apple cares about it being real or genuine. If Apple had the choice between making it come across as honest and real and live and calculated and pre-recorded, and everything was tested, they know exactly how it's going to play out, they know exactly what everyone's going to see, Apple would much rather do that. So I think that moving forward, what they might end up doing with future events, rent out their own Steve Jobs theater, good idea. Come to our glorified Apple movie theater to watch the exact same thing you could at home. Yeah. The one thing I was considering that I've seen some people floating around the idea of is that this might be Apple's way of trying out what they could do in the future by inviting, this time it's going to be developers because this is the developer conference, but in the future, maybe if they have new hardware that they want the media to try out themselves, right? Because that was probably the biggest advantage that YouTubers and journalists had whenever there was in-person events, is a lot of the time right afterwards you could go check out the hardware and they had it available and you could film yourself using it and hold it and experience it. Maybe in the future, Apple will invite media journalists and YouTubers and stuff to film their hands-on impressions with the hardware, but the keynote itself will still be all virtual, all online. And basically, when you go to the Steve Jobs Theater, you're just going to watch the live stream that everybody can watch at home. And maybe that's the only advantage there is from actually going in person. Having someone physically go up on stage and talk might not really be necessary anymore. And even that hybrid approach, I'm not even completely sold on, to be honest, because I got the impression from a lot of YouTubers and journalists that it's quite a rush because they don't have enough hardware for everybody. So basically, all the journalists and people have to all flock around the limited prototype hardware and film it as quickly as they can, and do everything with it, and try to get their impressions out. But they're surrounded by other people. They're limited by time. They can't stay there all day. And I think what's probably more effective, and at least a bit more honest from the reviewer's perspective, is Apple to do these review embargoes that they've been doing for the past couple of years. Where MKBHD or The Verge or whoever, they all get their hardware early, and they review it, and they're under contract, so they can't talk about it until a certain day. And then on that day, all the reviews drop. But I think you would get a better review and better impressions if people had more extended use with the product to talk about. Have they ever released hardware at Dub? Been a while, can't remember. Yeah, 2019 they did release hardware, but I think that Apple's marketing strategy was very different back then, and I don't even know if I would necessarily say it was effective back then. Yeah, this is the Pocket Cinema. Yeah, oh, that's a good example. Turn off your Wi-Fi hotspots, please. There was a time in the past where Steve Jobs was trying to show off a Wi-Fi demo between the 3GS and the iPhone 4, and the demo was not working because everybody at the theater was using the Wi-Fi. So can you imagine if all of the media and journalists and everybody just showed up to the Apple event and they were all just live tweeting it or live blogging it and watching it from the Steve Jobs Theater? And because they were using up so much internet bandwidth, the live stream from Apple actually started to lag for everybody. That would never happen, but yeah, it would be bad. Wait for the event to end and schedule a UPS end of day delivery to the YouTubers. I'm pretty sure that's what already happens, because if you notice, the channels that review units that get them early, most of the time they say, I've been using it for about a week, or some say I've been using it for 2 weeks or a couple weeks. And that's usually how long it's been since the announcement. So they don't get to talk about it right away, but I'm fairly confident that during these virtual events and announcements and stuff, most of the reviewers get it a couple days, at least a couple days after the event happens. So it might not be end of day. That would be kind of dangerous because you run the risk of potentially delivering a review embargo unit before the event has happened. So they give themselves a couple days to be safe. They probably don't even, ship them out until after the event takes place. But it's definitely much faster than the pre-orders ship. When the events aren't in person, it feels like there's a lot less hype for an event. Watching the event seems very quiet and secluded. That's funny because I don't really get that same impression personally. I find the online events real hype, a lot of hype behind them, partly because the visualizations are always different and they're always unique. And as soon as you jump into the event, you're not really sure which way the camera's going to move or what's coming up next. And they do these far more interesting reveals, like the iPhone 12 reveal I thought was really cool because they have CGI and CAD models of the iPhones that are like the size of buildings. So when they show them off, they're doing these like impossible angles that you could never get in an in-person event. And the reason I think I'm less in favor of the in-person events is because just logistically, it's not possible for lots of people to go to those things. I'm sure they're probably very exciting for the people there because you're actually seeing Tim, you're actually seeing Craig in person. But for the most part, you're still looking at a screen. And everyone online is got to watch through a live stream anyway. And I would much rather have a planned, calculated event rather than one where there's mistakes and something might slip up. Unless you just take pleasure in them making mistakes, then I get why you would like that, but at the same time, I would understand why Apple would not want to keep doing that. And for the record, when I asked MKBHD if he would rather go back to in-person events or virtual, he said virtual. That's a guy who's gone to all of the in-person events, and he's like, yeah, I want to keep doing virtual. He's like, it's so much nicer to just watch a really, really well done presentation, both cinematically and with the timing, and there's not too much fluff, and there's not so much crappy demos. The fact that he gets to record his recap and his impressions directly afterwards, and he doesn't have to fuss around with a travel iMac or pack all of his equipment with him and book a hotel and book flights just to watch something that everybody's going to watch at the same time online. Yeah, I agree. This just makes more sense. Yeah, we had MKBHD on the podcast a few months ago. I think they're more fun to watch personally. Since the M1 Ultra chip is the last one of the M1 family, I think one of the first Apple Silicon Mac Pros will be named X1 for Extreme. I don't think that's a terrible idea. If I'm not entirely sure how I interpreted that, because yeah, they did say that M1 Ultra would be the last of the family. Some people are interpreting that the M2 series of chips will, that's what the Mac Pro silicon will be based on, and that architecture will be optimized for the M2. So they're going to call it M2 Ultra or something like that. Because everyone's basically ruled out, okay, there's nothing above M1 Ultra in the M1 family. Um, so maybe branding it as something else. It's still weird to me because, as far as we're aware, all of these leaks about the Jade die and the Jade 2C die, which ended up being the M1 Ultra, is still the basic premise that Apple is stitching silicon together. That's what the M1 Ultra was. It's kind of like interweaving two M1 Maxes, and all of these leaks and rumors are pointing to the Mac Pro basically stitching together four M1 Maxes. So why do they use M1 for the Ultra, but they don't want to use M1 for the Mac Pro, even though it still sounds like fairly similar architecture? Um, it's going to be two M1 Ultras essentially stitched together, but they want to come up with some other terminology for that, I guess. I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say that it's built more on the A16 chip architecture than it is the A15, so that might warrant a rebrand, but it's definitely going to be confusing if they brand it as M2 Max or M2 Ultra or something, and then they have to later on unveil the new MacBook Air and be like, okay, and this is regular M2. It's like the tradition of them continuing to start with the entry level chip and then work their way up. I don't think they need to ditch that tradition. I think that makes sense for Apple Silicon announcements. Is you start with the low powered one and then you work your way up. Some people have said, oh, because the M1 is already out, we don't need to use that running theme anymore. Now we can start with the high end M2 and work our way down. I'm kind of like, it's just sounds kind of confusing to me. So yeah, something like X1 or Z, I think would make actually a lot of sense. M1Z or something, just because Z in the what's it called, iPad. The one time they used Z in their silicon was with the iPad Pro in 2020. That was A12Z, which I thought was kind of perfect because it's the last letter in the alphabet, and that was the last version of the A12 chip. So if there was a last version of M1, I would call it M1Z. Um, why did you call the NYPD the Paceman Police in your New York vlog? I don't. Oh, did you mean Pac-Man Police? Oh, okay. Yeah, it was because the sirens of the police cars in New York City sounded kind of like the Pac-Man sound effect. I'd never heard police cars that made that noise. But thank you for the super chat, Option Command Media. Okay, yeah, I just corrected himself. Pac-Man. Yi Hirasawa says, I prefer it to stay online forever. I do too, just because as much as it's probably fun for someone to go to an in-person event, ultimately the maximum number of people Apple will ever be able to take to an in-person event is going to be somewhere around 5 or 6,000 people. And there are hundreds of thousands of people that watch these events. So trying to make the experience as similar as they can for everybody, I think is just more fair. I mean, it's probably like kind of giving in to the people feeling like they're in some elite squad, or they feel more important if they're like, I get to go to the event and not everyone does. I'm special because Apple sent me an invite and you didn't get an invite. It's like, I don't really have a need for that. I mean, I'm not really an event person in general. I don't go to concerts. I don't go to, big, I don't know. I never went to VidCon. I never went to CES, and I never really desired to, just because I'm not like a particularly huge fan of big crowds and, a large number of people. Even before COVID, like parking, transportation, booking hotels. I want to travel, but most of the places we travel to are not, going to where there's a big event or something. It's just like sightseeing. I want to do my own schedule and take it as I feel. Whereas you go to an event, you got a bunch of people all trying to cram into one thing. That's just not really my thing personally. I've had the A12Z 11-inch iPad Pro. Yeah, it was a good option. It's still overkill, personally. I don't think the silicon is being properly utilized in the A12X or the A12Z. Telephone Background says, well, I really like the virtual events. I can't deny that an event like WWDC 13, when they announced the iOS 7 redesign and the Trashcan Mac Pro, wouldn't have been as cool without that hype audience. It's possible. I still think it's cool to watch, even if there's not a big, audience cheering there. But I do think that there's been a lot more awkward and cringe moments from the audience than there have been happy, like, exciting moments. Like, yeah, hearing the crowd get all pumped and excited whenever there's a huge announcement. Like, I remember very vividly watching live the announcement of the Apple Watch and how the crowd basically went wild. Tim Cook unrolled his sleeve and held up the Apple Watch, and it was a long time. If you go back and watch it, I think it was, oh, when was it? I want to say it was with the iPhone 6 unveiling. So I think it was a September 2014 event. I could be wrong, but I believe it was a September 2014 event where they unveiled the new Apple Watch, and just everyone flipped out. It was probably like a solid 60 seconds, or a solid like 90 seconds of people just standing and clapping, which, was cool in the moment, but at the same time it is kind of like, okay, is this, a cult? Is everyone worshiping Tim at this moment? Yeah, it was 2014. Thank you, Virgil, for the 7 months of support. All my best to everyone. Keep it going, Drew. Thank you. I'll keep doing this as long as you guys are watching. There's been weird noises since people have donated for the past 4 months now, I think. How much did you pay him, Kibby HD, to get him on your podcast? $0. I sent him an email and said, hey, love what you're doing. Do you want to collab sometime? Do you want to come on my show? How about tomorrow? And he said, sounds good. See you then. And then we recorded the thing. And he received $0 after that. That's usually how most collabs go. Typically, that's that's how it works. Let's see. I think I'm pretty sure it was 2014. They delivered the Apple Watch, I think, in April of 2015, but it was unveiled in September of 2014. Let's switch to backup here. Apple only launched iPhone Mini 12 and 13 as an excuse for you to go higher in price. No one in my network chose iPhone Mini after seeing it in the store. Yeah, I know that the Mini did not sell incredibly well, but I don't think that was the only reason. I think it may have been partly that Apple wanted to keep the price point of the new iPhones the same. They liked the price point, and the OLED iPhones were always going to cost more money. That was just obvious from the beginning to me. The OLED panel is, I believe, if not it's like either first or second most expensive components that go into the entire phone. So the camera, the battery, the processor, none of that stuff is as expensive as the display. And the jump from the Liquid Retina on the iPhone 11, which they sold for $700, to the OLED panel, which they sold for the 6.1-inch OLED panel, they sold for $829. I knew there was going to be a jump there because OLED is not as cheap as LCD. So I just figured that was inevitable, and it's possible that maybe they wanted to make the Mini option just to kind of test the waters of demand, like how much market interest is there in a small iPhone, because there's a ton of people, there's a ton of, what's it called? I've known a lot of people that have enjoyed the Mini iPhone. My sister being one of them, my brother-in-law being one of them. It's not a super popular segment, but there are a lot of people that just wanted, not a bad phone, but a small phone. And it's always been just associated that if you want a smaller iPhone, you have to have worse specs. And the Mini tries to combat that stigma as much as possible. Obviously, you're fundamentally limited by space, so that's why they can't put the Pro camera in the Mini. It would literally not fit. And the battery, obviously, is worse, just because you physically can't put in as big a battery. So that's the problem. The camera on the Pro model iPhone is cool, but I'd totally buy a regular Max iPhone. I think that one's going to sell the best, if I'm being honest with you guys. Like, I genuinely think that the bigger iPhones always sell really, really well. And the only reason the Pro Max is not the best-selling iPhone is because of the price. But most people, when they're in the market for a new phone, I think the biggest things that stand out to them are the size of the display and how good is the battery life. And the 14 Max is probably going to have a really good battery life because it's as big as a Pro Max, but it's a 60 hertz display instead of 120. LTPO might make the difference small, but just the fact that the camera bump won't be as large, it's not going to be a crazy huge bulge like the Pro and Pro Max will have. The camera bump will be pretty much the same size as the iPhone 12 and 13 camera bump, so they might be able to stuff a little bit more battery capacity in that one. I would not be shocked if the iPhone 14 Max has a battery life that's like on par with the 13 Pro Max, which is an absurdly long battery life for the record. Maybe to save on cost, they'll put in a smaller battery capacity just because they don't feel like it, but they're definitely going to have room in that chassis. They're going to have room to breathe. I would not be shocked if there's some useless plastic in there that's just for structural integrity to prevent it from being too hollow. Um, do you think the 14 models will have better or worse battery life? As far as we're aware, they seem to be increasing the overall thickness. All of the rumored CAD files are showing a thicker chassis and a thicker camera bump. So I don't see a situation where the battery life gets worse. At best, it'll be the same. Not best. At worst case scenario, it will be the same. Oh, okay. Thank you for the super chat, Option Command Media. He says the sirens sound like that because they have rumblers. They get to low frequencies. Oh, gotcha. Yeah, I could tell it was Rockford Media, but thank you. I appreciate the super chat. No, I knew they had probably some answer for the sirens being that way, but it just sounded funny to me. I was never heard police sirens like that. It'd be funny if Apple streamed the pre-recorded keynote with a picture-in-picture view of the audience reacting to it just to troll the online viewers. That would be kind of funny. Just like online impressions. Maybe that is how Apple kind of captures that magic, right? Remember when everybody would, I mean, the chat was just mentioning this earlier. They were excited for like iOS 7 was this big redesign and it brought a lot of energy to have the audience clapping and screaming and being like, "Woo, this looks great." Maybe the event is pre-recorded, right? So the event is all virtual and it has the cameras and the drones flying around and everything and the CGI. But they also route in a live feed of the audio, or like you said, maybe a picture-in-picture of the in-person audience briefly, and they cut to that occasionally. So it's a virtual event, but you still could get that hype. And if there's cheering going on, you feed in that audio and pump it into the actual broadcast, even though it's pre-recorded. It sounds a little technical, but I'm sure they could figure it out. They're Apple; they know how to do this kind of stuff. That's one way you could still preserve the fun, ingenious type of filming of the virtual events, but also capture a lot of that in real life hype that the audience provided. Maybe that's how they could kind of do a hybrid approach, which is kind of interesting. I know so many people who would love a regular Max iPhone. Most people who have a Pro Max IRL have it because it's so big. That's what I've run into. I've seen a lot of people with Pro Max iPhones that are, when I talk to them, they're not in it for the camera. Or I doubt it's for the 120 hertz. Usually it's a combination of it had the best battery life and it had a bigger screen. And as much as I love the mini iPhone and I want that to keep going, I can't deny there's a crap ton of people that all really like big phones. And that's why Android has leaned very much into having bigger phones. And that's why the bigger iPhones sell so well. The average size of the best-selling iPhone has just continued to increase in screen size over time. And we might be hitting the kind of limits of how big the screen can get before it's impractical. But yeah, I think I think that the 14 Max is just going to be in that perfect little sweet spot, and it's because it's not $1,000. It's not necessarily a cheap iPhone, but it's at a price point that because the pros are going to get most of the attention. They're going to have the updated eye hole design, and everybody's going to be talking about the Pro iPhones and all their new camera features. But it's like, oh, but geez, they start at $1,000. Well, here you have this 14 Max. It starts at $899 when you buy it through a carrier with a contract or whatever. If you buy it unlocked, it's $929. But that's not the price point Apple's going to advertise. They're going to say it starts at $899. Asterisks with the certain contracts. Oh, Don _C. Thank you for becoming a channel supporter. Where was I talking to you? I feel like your name is familiar. Was I talking to you on Twitter somewhere? I'm sorry. I'm interacting with so many people. I can't keep track of where I saw you. But your profile picture looks familiar. But thank you for supporting the channel. I appreciate that. 120 versus 60 is quite a bit less noticeable on smaller displays, so almost nobody notices 120 hertz if I show them on a phone. Really? Well, I know people that definitely don't notice the difference between 60 and 120, but I haven't noticed people say, like, I notice it on a big screen and not a small screen. I actually thought 120 hertz felt smoother and more noticeable on my phone than it did the iPad, but I think that's mostly because it's an OLED panel with quicker touch sampling, or the response time of the pixels is faster than the LCD on the iPad. But I definitely can still see the difference on all sizes. I noticed it on my MacBook Pro. The second I unboxed and set it up, I'll try to be good grammar and not talk too much. You're a member. You can talk. I don't. I really want my next iPhone to be the mini, but I just want a Pro version for the promotion. I know, man. I definitely, after picking it up in person, I can say wholeheartedly, I absolutely would have bought the 13 mini if it had 120 hertz. That would have been an instant sell for me. I love the red color. I when I was in New York City a couple months ago, I finally looked at the 13 mini in person. Oh my god, that color is so good, and the form factor is awesome. It's just that 60 hertz. I couldn't do it. I don't see Apple making iPhone 14 make more expensive than 929. That's a lot for a regular non-pro device. It seems like a lot, but with inflation and the fact that the Pro iPhones probably have a decent chance of going up in price, it's honestly not that bad, especially when you consider a lot of people are doing trade-in now, and Mark Gurman is talking about the hardware subscription model. Apple probably would launch that with an iPhone if they do launch it. Um, so Apple's probably going to tell you, trade in your iPhone 10R or iPhone 11, you get $300 off or whatever. That turns into a $500 upgrade. So you just bring your old phone, get the new 14 Max. You'll have the biggest screen in an iPhone, and you'll get one of the best battery lives of any iPhone. It'll cost you 500, $600. And you can get the Apple Card and finance it over the course. They have their marketing tricks, but $899 is like a little bit more than what people are paying for the most popular iPhone right now, which is the 13 and the 12 before that. That 6.1-inch form factor has always done pretty well. I will never subscribe to an Apple product. Sorry, Apple. No, I won't either. I personally think it's a terrible decision from a consumer's perspective. From a business perspective, I think it's genius. I think Apple's really smart to come up with that kind of stuff because they can essentially get so much more money out of you if you never actually own the product. Like, it's the same reason leases are practically pure cash for so many car companies. This is like, we can get you to pay this much money per month, and then when the lease is up, we get the car. So we still have a product that we can resell after the lease ends, and couple that with the amount of money we get from your lease. It's far more profitable. From a shareholder perspective, I would say it's a great idea for them to offer their hardware as a subscription. From a consumer's point of view, no, I would not recommend anybody do it. I would not say, hey, if you're trying to get an iPhone in a more affordable manner, just subscribe to a month. It's like, oh, no, you're not even getting close to ownership with that, and you're paying monthly for it. So I don't know. If they let you cancel at any time, and I don't know. The weird thing is that because Apple's going to play it safe, if they do allow hardware subscriptions in the future, which I think is fairly likely, Bloomberg's pretty accurate, and it just kind of makes sense, is the changes get smaller and smaller over year. Like White Rose is asking, what's the difference between the iPhone 13 and 14? Not much. I mean, the biggest difference is going to be the size options. We're going from 13 and 13 mini to then 14 and 14 Max. So now there will be a larger size under $1,000. That's never been done before. You could never get a 6.5-inch OLED iPhone for under $1,000. That's going to be possible now. So I think that will automatically have a lot of interest. And Apple's probably a little bit worried for how many people aren't going to buy the Pro Max anymore. They were, I think, playing a little bit with fire when they sold the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro, because I thought those two phones were incredibly similar, and yet they still both sold okay. They didn't cannibalize each other too much. It actually, I think, might have more of the inverse effect, where it's like, well, if I'm willing to spend that much money anyway, why not spend a little bit more and get the Pro? Maybe people will see that and be like, well, if the Pro is only $100 more or $200 more, might as well just get the Pro because that one's better. But there's so few differences if we're just talking about the 6.1-inch iPhones between the 13 and the 14. Ignore the minis, ignore the Maxes and the Pros for a second. They're both going to have the same notch. They're both going to be 60 hertz OLED panels. They're both going to be dual camera with ultra wide. I don't believe that new 48 megapixel sensor that's rumored is coming to the normal 14. That's just going to be on the Pros. So there's even rumors that they're not putting the A16 chip in the iPhone 14. They're going to give it the beefed up version of the A15. I know that's a little bit confusing, but Apple's making like 3 different versions of the A15 chip currently. Like the iPhone 13 and 13 mini, the non-Pros, they have 4 gigs of RAM, and then the Pros have 6 gigs of RAM. It's still the A15 chip, but they also have 5 GPU cores on the Pros, whereas the regulars have 4 GPU cores. So the rumor that claimed Apple is not putting the A16 chip in the regular 14 and 14 Max, they said they're bringing the higher end version of the A15, which has 6 gigs of RAM and 5 GPU cores. Still an improvement, but branding wise, it would come across fairly similarly. Probably doesn't matter at the end of the day because everyday consumers that aren't buying the Pro iPhones, they don't care if it's the A15 or whatever. They'll just be like, it's a phone. I don't care what processor it has. It's not really like the A14 or A15 are very slow chips anyway. So I think the main reason they're probably doing that is to not make the iPhone 14 series feel like such a good deal that no one wants to opt for the Pro. They're trying to come up with better reasons for you to opt for the Pro. So they're building in more silicon differences between the two. And because there's so few changes between those two phones, there might be a handful of new camera features. There's probably going to be some features on the Pro iPhones that, required that extra GPU core and the RAM that they can now do on the entry-level iPhones. So probably the new iPhone 14 can do ProRes at the higher frame rate and stuff, or, maybe cinematic mode is more unlocked or something like that. But yeah, as far as I can tell, very few differences between the 6.1-inch 13 and 14. I would describe this as an S year, but the only reason I don't describe it as an S year is because this is going to be every year. It's going to become harder and harder for Apple to come up with meaningful, large upgrades. That's why they're going to push for hardware subscriptions, is because it takes away the concept of, oh my God, I got to spend $800 or $600 on this whole new iPhone purchase. And instead, Apple just wants you to think, no. You just pay $30 a month to have the latest iPhone. And because we don't want you to eventually own that iPhone outright, and they know just going through the motions and the process of upgrading your phone is already kind of annoying and frustrating for people. You got to get the SIM card all swapped out. You got to sign in all your apps. And now when you set up the phone, it asks your email. Every email in your app has to enter the password again, syncing all the contacts, transferring all the pictures. They know that a lot of people don't want to fuss around with all of that. So instead, they're going to toss in, let's just throw in Apple One so you can get your Apple Music, your Arcade, your TV Plus, your iCloud storage. Let's rope that in with the hardware subscription. And then you're not thinking about, should I upgrade this year? It's just like, no, you're just paying to have the current iPhone you have, and you got it at a really low price. So the monthly membership is so low that Apple's mindset is hopefully you're not thinking about it, because then 3 years will go by and you realize, oh my God, I spent so much money on Apple hardware. But that's, from a business perspective, I think the right thing to do when your hardware is getting more and more minor, and your business model used to be built around a bunch of people upgrading when the new iPhones come around. Now they're trying to convert that revenue and spread it out as to more recurring monthly fees instead of upfront cost. Do you think iOS 16 will have an icon redesign like how macOS has right now? I think it's it's impossible to know, but no, I'll just put it that way. I don't. I think that every time you redesign the user interface or redesign the icons, you take the risk of certain people not liking it. And with so many people on iOS now, there was so many more people using iOS devices than there are um, using what's it called? There's so many more people using iOS devices than there were back in iOS 7 days, and that was a big redesign, and a lot of people didn't even like that. So it's like, I think at this point, Apple probably wants to play things more safe and not drastically change the look of everything, because that can confuse people. There's a lot of people that aren't looking for iOS to change a lot, and they just want their phone to work. Whereas there's all these techies that are like, we've had the same Safari logo all these years. I want it to look different. I don't know why it matters that it looks different, but people just they're bored. They're bored with their phones, so they're hoping iOS spices things up just by rearranging colors and pixels. And it's like, it's not a practical thing, and it's just going to end up confusing a lot of people. So I don't think they're going to do giant graphic redesigns like that anymore. Some minor tweaks here and there, but the kind of jump we got from iOS 6 to 7, I don't think that's going to happen anymore. I could be wrong. It's funny because a lot of people are like, iOS 7 was horrible. I hated it. I had a ton of fun. I thought it was the coolest day ever when they unveiled it. I was like, whoa, it looks so different now. I loved it. Option Command Media says, leaks Apple Pro says we are getting InfoShack and macOS icon. Okay, I'll believe that when I see it. What color do you see being the new Pro color for the 14 Pro? We've had Alpine Green, we've had Sierra Blue, we've had Pacific Blue. It's always, just because of how difficult it is to get paint right on that glossy stainless steel that the Pros use, it always has to be kind of a muted color. As much as I want like a product red Pro iPhone, that would be awesome. Or I want like a jet black, all piano black look. That's kind of just hard to get right at the manufacturing level, which is why they typically do the lighter tones. So I'm going to guess, could they do another shade of blue? I don't know. Maybe like they've done blue several years in a row now. I don't know. Michael Ma, otherwise known as Apple iDesigner on Twitter and Instagram, he did a good concept for the 14 Pro that I really liked, and it was kind of like a light shade of purple. It's kind of a lavender look, and I thought, yeah, that looks kind of realistic. The Safari update was huge. I love the new tab design, gestures, and everything at the bottom is easier to get to. I don't know if I'd describe it as huge, but yeah, it is noticeable. I wouldn't describe it as big a deal as iOS 7 was, but let's see. The thumbnail for this live stream looks epic. Almost looks like it could be a new channel icon. I like where your head is at. It very well may end up being a new artwork for the channel someday. Let's see. Michael says, I'm hoping with the A15 chip being used in the normal iPhones, that can potentially cut the price to $749 rather than $799. Apple might care about lower pricing this year since there's no more mini. No, I don't personally think there's any chance of that happening. The silicon is so cheap. Like, I don't think people truly grasp, like, part of the overall cost of the phone. The A series of chips is such a minor part, like, in terms of cost. All of the money it takes to develop that chip is spent in R&D. Once it's in mass production, the material cost of silicon is next to nothing. It's dirt cheap. So by not including the A16 chip, they're not saving a bunch of money at all. The only reason it's the same thing as the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro back when that came out. The 12 Pro came with 128 gigs of storage. The iPhone 12 came with 64 gigs of storage. If you know the difference in price to include that, twice the storage for silicon, it's like pennies. Like, it's literally less than $1 for them to opt for 128 gigs. The only reason they opt for 128 gigs on the 12 Pro was to make the Pros feel like they're a better deal. Yes, they're more expensive, but you're getting more storage out of it. Therefore, that way it's more justifiable. So I think they're doing probably the exact same thing with the iPhone 14 lineup. They're giving the Pros the A16 chip. For one, because I think there's nothing really that wrong with the A15, especially if you consider, okay, the 14 and 14 Max, they're both 60 hertz displays. So if your argument is like, oh, better gaming performance or better graphics, everything those phones will ever do is always and forever going to be played at a maximum of 60 frames a second. So if you want to go higher than that, it's kind of unnecessary. Secondly, the iPhone 14 and 14 Max are not rumored to have camera sensors that are that different. They might improve the aperture a little bit. They might improve the image stabilization a little bit, but for the most part, probably the same megapixels, probably the same amount of data that those two cameras can take in. There's no LiDAR, there's no telephoto. So, as far as computational photography and videography can do, that camera setup is probably fully utilized and maxed out with the A15 chip. I don't think that there's a bunch more stuff they could do with those sensors if they were given the A16. So it's like, could they? Yes. Would it help? Probably not. I think that just giving it a more unlocked version of the A15 chip would probably help a lot. Um, that could give it the ability to record ProRes, and that kind of stuff. I could see them starting the pros at 256 if they get a price increase. Yeah, that's the other reason I was going to say absolutely do not expect price decreases this year. Inflation is a real thing, and it's already hit the iPhone SE. There was very little changes with that iPhone, and they still upped the price $30. So now it starts at $429 instead of $399, and that's a pretty cheap iPhone. These are more expensive iPhones that get more intensive hardware, like the OLED display and like the ultra wide camera and the 5G ultra wideband modems, which are also, I think, one of the most expensive components that goes into the phone. So I repeat, I hope I'm wrong on this, but definitely do not expect price decreases. If anything, there might be price increases this year just because of how much the US dollar has weakened. I would not be shocked at all if just because there's so few changes with the iPhone 14 versus 13, I think that price is going to stay the same for the 6.1-inch option and then $100 more for the Max. That's just standard size deviation. Apple's always done that. Like, if they have two phones in different sizes, there's usually always $100 between them. Something like that. But the Pros I might see getting more expensive just by all of the changes they're bringing to the eye hole cutout display. I don't even think that's an upgrade personally. I think that's a side grade at best. Arguably it's worse. It's definitely one of those reasons I'm not terribly like, oh shucks, I should have said earlier that I'll upgrade to the 14. Nothing so far that's been rumored about the iPhone 14 I'm interested in. Like 48 megapixel camera, it's like, dude, the pixels are not the problem with that camera. The battery life is great on my current phone. The display is fantastic. There's so little complaints I have with it. All of my biggest issues with my 13 Pro Max are not going to be fixed by the 14 Pro Max. Just to be clear, like the biggest things I would love on my phone is for it to get USB-C or a titanium chassis, which I don't even think that's rumored to happen anymore. That's about it, I guess. Those are the biggest ones I could think of. What are your thoughts on Apple and the potential of being part of the metaverse with the glasses leak that happened? Does it seem probable? I'm not convinced that the metaverse is gonna be the next big thing. I think it's kind of a weird. People are making it out to be a bigger deal than it is. I know Apple has expressed mild interest in augmented reality, but I don't think the end goal of that is the metaverse. I think it's augmented. It's putting things on top of the real world, not creating a virtual one, and that's what the metaverse feels like. The SE price cost is likely more due to just Qualcomm price gouging their 5G modems rather than inflation itself. I keep hearing people say that, and I'm sure that there are some companies raising prices unnecessarily, but I don't think that's most of the situation. Like, this is a documented thing. The U.S. government is tracking inflation. It's gone up 10% in the last 2 years. That's not made up. That's that's been disclosed by the Federal Reserve. So it's a real thing. Like, the U.S. dollar just does not buy what it used to. I mean, like, look at the price of groceries. If any of you actually track what the cost of, like, just food or gas or water, everything has gone up in price, and it's not all just price gouging. I don't know the exact situation with Qualcomm, but regardless of why Qualcomm is raising prices, it could be genuine, it could not be. It's still going to affect Apple. So this is I wish people would just start writing off every price increase as, oh well, they're just greedy. It's not inflation. It's like, well, how do you know it's not inflation? Oh, just I don't know. They just seem greedy, so they're probably greedy. Like, dude, Can you look at their balance sheet? Can you look at their operating expenses and confirm to me that, their cost of operations has not gone up? If inflation was the reason, then the iPad Air wouldn't have stayed the same price even with adding 5G. I don't think that's necessarily true. It doesn't mean Apple has to raise the prices on everything. I think it's very possible they're taking a smaller profit margin on the iPad Air 5 than they used to. And I think it's going to be the same situation with the iPhone 14. I'm not anticipating the 6.1 inch, regular option will get a price increase, but I don't think the profit margin will be as good. Apple kind of builds in profit margins that are fairly thick across their hardware so that if things go wrong, they're prepared for it. They don't necessarily have to raise prices if they don't want to. Yeah, Don C right here says it's not gouging. Our freight rates have doubled and tripled in some cases. That's very, very true from the people I've talked to, who work in warehouses and infrastructures, of just like the cost of shipping things, and all of the products Apple's building right now are made in China and they got to be shipped over, and a lot of the suppliers that they buy from are using freight, using a lot of shipping, and all of that has skyrocketed in price. It's not fake. Some of it probably is, but I don't think most of it is fake. I think people just write it off too quickly, especially the Starlink price hikes. Everyone was so quick to just write that off as, no, they're just greedy. I was like, look around. Look at what the cost of things are. Look at your groceries. That's it's changed. Everything has. Doritos has been putting less chips in the bag. Some say it's a chip shortage. That's probably, they've been impacted by the chip shortage, pretty much. 5G modems causing a price hike shouldn't be written off. Right, but the cost of producing 5G modems going up also I don't believe should be written off. It's very possible. Um, all of Apple's profits are coming from iPod Touch. Don't think I don't notice the guys that are trying to reference iPods in every one of my videos. I hate the iPod. I want it to be killed off. And I see you. Every single one of your videos, people try to bring up iPod Classic, iPod Touch. I blank it on your name, but I know what you're doing, and I know you're trolling. I can see it. It's obvious. Let's see. I'm tempted to get an 11-inch 2018 iPad Pro to see if it really is as good as you all claim. I don't know what iPad you're coming from, but as far as iPads go, I consider that basically peak. Obviously, now there's some new iPads with center stage and mini LED and that kind of thing, but as far as just like general usage goes, I think this was the peak iPad. Like, there's never been this many changes in 1 year, and there never probably will be again. This is why Scott will be buying this year's iPhone in green for cheaper when the 14 comes out. Not saying that inflation isn't real, but you have to acknowledge that some businesses do arbitrarily raise prices because of monopoly pricing. The media industry is a prime example of that. I agree it happens, but I also think that the circumstance we're in right now makes it incredibly difficult to know which is which, unless you've seen the operating expenses. Yes, like Qualcomm probably controls a lot of the 5G pricing, but do you think Qualcomm has been impacted by global inflation? I'm going to say 100% yes. Whoever they're buying from, whatever operating expenses they have, I'm almost absolutely positive they have gone up. Basically, no operating expenses have remained the same in recent history. So, can we ever really know for sure? It's like it's very, very hard to tell the difference. So I would say like it's possible, but I'm gonna lean more towards inflation. I legit haven't seen someone use an iPod in at least 8 years. I definitely haven't seen someone use one like unironically in public. I've seen people that have them sitting around, and I'll ask about it, and they'll pick it up, but that kind of thing. Uh, no, I've seen some of Max Tech's videos, but I haven't watched the one on upgrading the hard drive on the Mac Studio, mostly because I have no interest in doing that. I'm an Apple guy, so I don't care about upgradability. If you're an Apple guy that cares about upgradability, you're just going to be ticked off most of the time, I think. Just because it doesn't seem to be what Apple prioritizes in like any of their products. And I'm guessing that the Mac Studio, while technically possible, makes it insanely difficult, to the point that I would rather just not do it. If you want more storage, either pay for more local storage up front, but it's expensive. Yeah, I don't care. It's comes with the territory. That's what you're buying when you buy Apple. Um, or you could get an external RAID or a NAS. Get external drives. It's got a 10 gigabit Ethernet port you can plug directly into, use as external storage. It's got plenty of Thunderbolt ports for you to plug in external storage. That's the way it's meant to be. I'm not going to recommend anybody open up their Mac Studio and try to, solder in the NAND drives or the SSDs or whatever, and try to make that work. It's just the time and the risk you take when doing that. I do not recommend. Drew buys 8 terabytes. Who needs upgrades? Exactly. Exactly. Well, if you could find me a laptop with a battery life this good, a processor this good, that can also take 8 terabytes of storage that you upgrade yourself, let me know. Let me know if that exists. I don't think it exists. Let's just agree that it's a combination of supply chain problems and consolidation of the market to a handful of businesses that causes the higher prices of most goods like meat and 5G modems. At this point, I'm going to say it's like 90% inflation, 10% handful of businesses that have complete power over the market. If you care about upgradability, you're not on a Mac. Yeah, I feel that way too. It's like, don't be buying this stuff if that's your intended purpose of it. I think if Apple wanted you to upgrade it, they would tell you about it. Don sees his companies also use these chances to raise prices in ultra competitive markets where raising prices can be virtually impossible under normal market conditions. It's true. If you're that's another part of the problem. If you're not demand constrained but supply constrained, you can get away with charging more for things because people will pay it. But I don't think that's really the issue right now, at least with iPhones and electronics. With EVs, yes, EVs are getting a lot more expensive because there's not enough supply and there's too much demand. It's not just inflation, but I'm sure that plays a part in it. iPods belong in a museum along with the Apple Watch Series 3. Yes, thank you, James. Let's see. Try the Parallels app. You can put Windows and Android on Apple devices. Why the heck would I do that? You want me to take the worst part about the competition and put it on my hardware? No, thank you. Apple block Mac OS if you upgrade your hard drive. That's a new strategy. Well, it's not just a software related issue. I looked into it a little bit just because I saw a lot of people in the Discord getting mad about it because I think, who was it? I think it was Luke Miani who was getting really frustrated that there was expansion slots technically on the silicon for the Mac Studio, but you couldn't just pop in an SSD and upgrade it. But it's because those aren't traditional SSDs. I think they're called NAND drives or something like that, but they don't have independent controllers. The controllers for those drives is baked into the M1 Ultra itself. And I don't know the reasoning behind that. It's probably has something to do with manufacturing efficiency and a combination with privacy, and not wanting any drive to just become unplugged and plugged in at a moment's notice. But either way, I still look at it as like, if Apple's not telling you how to do it, they probably don't want you to do it. So they may put in a software lock. They may physically make the hardware not good at that type of modularity. But regardless, don't buy into products expecting them to do things that they were not intended for. I don't care if you tear open the product and say, well, like, it should do this because I can see something. It's like they literally hid the screws behind the rubber seal on that thing. It was not intended to be opened up and worked on. It's so don't get upset when you find out that it's not great at that. Buy the products that are intended to be opened up and worked on if that's what you're looking for. A12Z chip is almost as good as the A15 Pro model chip, besides single scored machine learning, I think. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I think they could do better with the branding of the silicon. Like now we have M1 Pro, M1, and M1 Max and all that. But there's all these different versions of the A15 chip, but Apple keeps calling it the A15 chip. I feel like it would probably help clarify things a little bit more if they specified which chip they were using. Like the Pro iPhones could get A15 Pro, and the non-Pros will just get A15. iPad Mini can just get A15, but maybe the budget iPad or the iPad Air or something would get A15 Pro. That doesn't work because they gave it M1 now, I know. But I just think clarifying with the branding a little bit, the difference between this chip has 6 gigs of RAM and a 5-core GPU, and this chip has 4 gigs of RAM and a 4-core GPU, might help clarify a little bit. Um, NAND is a logic gate. Um, NAND is the material SSD and flash storage device used for actually storing the data. You can pronounce it like the word and NAND. Okay. I don't follow this stuff super closely, so I don't know the pronunciations and stuff, but I just know that there's some hardware limitations that make it much more difficult for you to expand the storage in your Mac Studio, but I was never expecting it to be easy. I was never into like this is an ARM architecture. This is basically a beefed up, super powerful iPhone processor. And now you're upset that it's not as upgradable as a custom PC. It's like what did you think was going to come from this? I really don't get it. I don't think Apple has ever cared about upgradability in recent history. I think the cheese grater Mac Pro was a troll. Genuinely, I don't think they built that thing intending it to be future proofed, because the main reason most people care about upgradability is that, well, I can buy what I need now, and then in the future I can buy the parts I need or the replacement components, and that way I don't have to buy a whole new machine, right? And you're telling me Apple dropped this super modular upgradable Mac Pro literally 1 year, less than 1 year actually, less than a year before officially launching hardware with their own silicon on the inside, with a completely different architecture that was going to make all of that Intel Mac modularity dated within a couple of years. So, do you think Apple's going to continue providing upgrade options for GPUs and CPUs, and you can upgrade your 2019 Mac Pro over time for years to go? No, of course not. All of that's dated now, and you can beat it out with the M1 Ultra given proper software utilization, and now you're going to have a whole new set of standards for the Mac Pro, and some of it will be maybe upgradable, but I'm predicting not as much as people are hoping. It's like they dropped that thing at the perfect moment so that they could capitalize on the upgradability sector, except with the highest profit margin computer of all time. So they instead of saying like, oh yeah, you can buy this machine and it'll last you 10 years because you can update the individual components that need addressing, it's like, no, we're just going to make that thing dated in 2, and then it's all useless now. It's like, that's the only thing we have going off. Like, the main reason people cared about upgradability was so that, you could buy something that was more affordable and then upgrade it yourself, except they started it with $6,000 and spec'd it up to $55,000. So it's like, your argument of cost savings isn't really there. It's definitely more expensive. It's probably one of the worst computer purchases you could have made in recent history, in my opinion. Like, to find out that after 2 years it would become obsolete, I would be super duper upset. I would be incredibly frustrated to find out that, well, you would have waited a couple of years, you could have bought something for a tenth the price that outperforms it. I would have much rather just, bought something sub $10,000 that lasts me until the transition is ready, and then you upgrade for that. And total price, you've spent $15,000 on upgrading every couple years, and instead of dropping $20,000 and hoping that carries you on for 10 years. It's like, I don't think that process of buying computers and trying to upgrade individual components is saving people money, especially with the price of graphics cards these days. It's like, I don't think it's working out. Um, Apple knows that upgradability does not equal longevity. You can manually stuff new RAM and SSD in a 2012 MacBook Pro, but it's still stuck on an older Mac OS and a 2012 Intel chip. Exactly. I don't think their business model has accommodated for that type of ownership experience. Mac Pro 2019 is worse than Mac Pro 2013 in terms of longevity. I would say, yeah, for like what you could get shortly after it was available, probably uh, biggest ripoff, especially for people who dropped over 10 grand on it, knowing that you probably would have been better off buying just a new Mac every couple of years or every 3 years or so. You probably would have spent less money and had a faster machine. I think the next Mac Pro will keep the PCIe MPX slots, but they won't support extra GPUs, only other cards. I I've got a bad feeling about this one. I'll be honest. I know there's a lot of people out there hoping for upgradability and modularity with it, but I just have not seen Apple prioritize that in recent history at all. And again, it feels like the 2019 Mac Pro was this big troll moment where they dropped the most expensive Intel Mac they could right before letting everyone know that that was useless and inefficient and overpriced. And Apple's logic, I'm not saying you all have to like Apple. You know, there's definitely some of you, like my friend Ross, that would much rather have a machine they can work on and upgrade. And that's where Windows is good for. That's the market Windows is good for. I'm just saying don't get mad at Apple for not becoming the custom PC market. Like there's a reason they're not doing that, and there's a market of people that don't want all this stuff to be upgradable and modular. They would rather it just be more efficient and smaller. And you know, some people would just rather buy a computer that they don't have to worry about performance wise for many many years rather than something that costs a little bit less, but they're going to have to pay for an upgrade as time goes on. How long will Intel Macs get macOS updates, do you think? Snow Leopard drop support just 3 years after the last powered PC Mac. I think that times are a little bit different now, especially with the iPads getting so many years of support and the software development team probably being a lot bigger. I still think most Intel Macs will get 7 or 8 years of software support. Maybe a little bit less. Maybe if Apple's in a rush to switch everything over to Apple Silicon, they might cut it off at 5. But I'd be very surprised if there were Intel Macs that were being sold now that only got 3 years of software support. Um, let's see. What do you think of Elon Musk Twitter? I think it's really interesting. Um, I think that he kind of took my advice. I'm sure he read my tweet specifically, but he was debating like if Twitter had issues with the algorithm or not being open enough about the source code, or having issues with free speech. Or it's a big question, but I think it's important to have a lot of people in the conversation about what's allowed and what's not allowed. And I definitely think Twitter probably doesn't have enough variety of opinions in their internal discussion team. Like it's a very powerful platform that is run by a very small number of people, and I think Elon's already suggested some ideas that I think would be much much better for Twitter. And he took my advice basically when he was thinking about what should be done, or what should there be an alternative to Twitter. And my response was like, basically, no, you can't start brand new social media sites and have them succeed. Like all social media sites are mostly accidental. Most people flock to them by happenstance. It's not because they had the better such and such. They don't have the better CPMs or the better layout. It's like sometimes it's just people happen to fall into a community that they're interested in. And when you make new social media platforms, you typically have a very hard time convincing a lot of people to switch to them unless they're just a really really big fan of the host or the person that created the website. But then you don't have a wide range of ideas, and there's not much conflict going on because everyone on the platform has the exact same thought process. So you need to work with the social media that's basically already been established. So I was suggesting like buying Twitter or becoming a majority shareholder of Twitter would be your best bet at addressing your concerns with the platform and the algorithm. You would not have much success just trying to create your own version of it. There's been so many big personalities that have tried to set up their own separate platform and their separate website, and it never really gets anywhere. There's big companies like Apple. They've tried with iTunes Ping, and Google tried with Google Plus. Facebook tried to make their own Snapchat, and they tried to emulate Instagram best they can, but they figured out that it just didn't work because people flock to the platforms that uh, they happen to fall into. It's just word of mouth, really. It's not about like which platform has the better feature or has the better resolution or the better upload limit. Twitter has all kinds of problems that could be easily fixed by an alternative website, but no one's going to leave because it's Twitter. It's just what they know, and that's where the community is. Getting people to leave social media sites for competitors is insanely difficult. I know this from firsthand experience. Back when I tried live streaming on Twitch, I tried for 3 years to convince people that it was a better platform for streaming, and I still believe it is a better platform for streaming. But just objectively, I never could get that many people to jump over because they're like, I know you on YouTube. I like YouTube. I don't want to download Twitch. It's confusing. I don't want another app. I don't know. I don't want another account. That's another password. That's just too much. So people just stay on YouTube. Um, yeah, Tesla marketing all over Twitter. Yeah, the Tesla does not advertise. The community advertises Tesla, but yeah, MySpace still exists. It's true. Let's see. Considering that the most recent Intel Macs aren't getting certain software features already because they need the M1, I have a bad feeling those Intel Macs will be cut off prematurely. I do think there's a decent chance that the Intel Macs won't get as many years of support as Apple Silicon, but I just don't think it'll be that bad. I don't think it'll be 3 years, maybe 5. Um, yeah, there's. I'm still trying to convince my family to get rid of Facebook. They still refuse. Exactly. I know tons of people that don't want to come off Facebook just because that's what they're used to. That's what they grew up with, so they're going to keep doing that. Um, Microsoft renamed Windows Tech Suggestions to Typing Insights. Oh, that's weird. Um, Social would have no point. I really like Twitter since it allows you to contact so many people. You can't have the same conversation on Instagram or TikTok. You kind of could. In general, I think Twitter probably has the best chance for success because I feel like Twitter hasn't been bought out by a major company yet. Like YouTube's owned by Google, and they're not going to give up YouTube. And Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp, and Meta owns Facebook. Uh, they just have too much power, and I'm just inherently not that big a fan of Meta in the first place. And honestly, I have issues with all social media. There's not one that I'm just like, yeah, this one gets it right, because there's still a lot of problems I have with Twitter. But I do agree that it's a very active place to engage with people, and that's probably where the most amount of interaction is between everyday people, brands, celebrities, billionaires, politicians. You kind of have everyone fairly active on one platform, but you don't really have that on Instagram and YouTube. You get some more political action on Instagram, but you get a lot more influencer interaction on YouTube. TikTok is its own can of worms. But yeah, I think that as far as like new social media or a way to interact with your fans or engage with people, Twitter's probably the best way to go about it. So, yeah, Instagram's cool, but I do hate Meta as well. Um, I don't know much about Tumblr. Is that still a thing? I'm sure it probably still exists. Apple having a dedicated iMessage chat room for their events would be interesting, like a pseudo Discord event space. It sounds like Apple Music Connect. It's one of those things that they're hoping catches on, and it just never does. Um, so yeah, you can't just be a big company and just like birth a new social media site that does really well. It's been tried countless times. Apple's tried it. I'm sure Samsung tried it at some point. Google's tried it. All that really can happen is an independent site that's usually a startup blows up, and then someone buys them out. Um, a big tech company like Google or Amazon. Amazon bought Twitch. Exactly. So I'm glad that Meta doesn't own Twitter. I would much rather Elon own a majority stake in Twitter than anybody else, I guess. Um, Especially if they're going to advocate for more, just fairness and less double standards and that kind of thing. It's a complicated subject. I don't want to get political about it, but yeah. I saw Apple's trying to open a bank. Is this true? I did not see any valid source claim that, but I want them to. I think that would be nice if they did. Yeah, screw Meta. I agree. If you can avoid using Meta services if at all possible, I would do it. Do you think the iPhone 14 Max rumor is legit? Yeah, it makes sense. I think it aligns with what's been going on with Apple and the mini iPhone's not selling too well, and the Max iPhone's usually having a lot of interest. So it's been fairly consistently reported on by several different analysts. A lot of people are agreeing on that one. So at this point, I would say, yeah, I could be wrong. Don't believe everything you read. It's possible it's wrong, but I think at this point, I'm fairly convinced there will be two 6.7-inch iPhones coming out in September. Apple makes a car. No, they don't, but they probably should have a while ago. Um, let's see. I do think the new Mac Pro will allow you to add non-unified RAM on top of the built-in unified memory. Unified is good, but 256 gigabyte is still not beating 2 terabytes. I just want to know how many people were buying that option. Like, for one, the Mac Pro maxed out at 1.5 terabytes, not 2. I know that you're rounding up a little bit, but you're rounding up by 500 gigs of RAM, which is a lot. How many workflows and use cases were actually hitting that limit? It felt like an absurd market to go after. Apple did officially purchase a banking company over in the UK. I don't think it means they're opening a bank, though. Yeah, well, they purchased a. I don't know if it was a bank. It was a banking, like you said. I think there was a company specialized in credit building. It was like building up your credit score. So it's not really the same as becoming a bank. It's a finance acquisition. Yeah, it's like it's more movement in the finance sector. So a lot of people were speculating, does that mean the Apple Card could launch in the United Kingdom? That makes a lot of sense to me. Them just buying that credit building company and then opening a bank. No, I don't think that's it. Uh, Financial technology company. Yeah. Here's a tech tip: don't believe any rumors at all. I think you probably will miss out a little bit if you don't believe any rumors. It's probably just a decent idea to weigh into what's possibly coming out at a certain time, because you don't want to buy the M1 MacBook Air the week before the M2 MacBook Air comes out. You don't want to get cheated at the last second. So just being at least mildly aware. I'm not saying you have to believe every spec and feature, but just being like mildly aware. Okay, maybe I should be careful about buying this product. It's a lot of money you guys are spending on most of this tech stuff. You're buying $200 headphones, $1,000 laptops, or $600 tablets. You should be aware if it's about to get refreshed or if something's about to change on it, what you're missing out on, what's rumored to come out. Not everything is real, but just being mildly aware. Okay, maybe I should wait a couple months to see what happens. But um, credit is a thing outside of the U.S. How could they? Yeah, I know credit cards are definitely not the same outside of the U.S., but they exist. Yeah. I wish Xfinity was more stable for me. Our gigabit internet is always less than 600 megabits and absolutely has never reached a gig. Yeah, I had the same situation. We paid for gigabit at Xfinity, not because I wanted gigabit. It was just the fastest upload you could get, which was 40 megabits up. If you didn't buy the gigabit plan, they gave you even slower than that up. So I was like, we have to buy gigabit, and download was never 1,000. It never got that fast. Let's see. If you need a reason to take rumors with a large grain of salt, is the Apple Watch Series 7 leaks last year with the squared off edges and production issues? Yeah, that was just completely wrong. It's a classic example of don't believe everything you read. But I just think you might miss out on some good buying guides if you don't pay attention to any rumors. It should just be. I think it's fun to find out which rumors are right and which ones are wrong. If we get lucky, we get 30 megabits up. Yeah, that sounds like Xfinity for sure. Any thoughts on the future of the iPad 10.2 inch? I think they have to keep it boring. There's no way they can make it better, otherwise it would just sell too well. So it's boring now, and it's kind of ugly, but it has to. It has to be boring and ugly. I don't see how that's changing. Um, no, I agree. It should be considered a scam. I mean, it does say when you buy it, it's like gigabit down. It's not saying you're getting a gigabit up. But yeah, the fact that you don't get speeds like that they cover themselves in the fine print. It always says on every single ad, it always says speeds may vary based on location. You might not actually get speeds that fast. But definitely, the fact that they could just raise the price willy nilly sucks. Um, yeah, there's there's a lot of stuff you shouldn't believe out there, but that's why I think it's helpful to have channels that are skeptical, to have, not someone I'm saying like I'm gonna predict everything exactly right, but just like you can come to your own conclusion. I just want to present to you some of the facts as to why I believe or don't believe certain rumors and leaks. I'd be like, well, Apple's done such and such in the past, so it would make sense for them to do this now, or just kind of keep expectations realistic rather than. It's probably not very helpful to have a channel that believes every single leak, right? Because we know every single leak is not correct. In fact, a lot of leaks are incorrect. So if you just have a channel that completely reports everything as fact, you're going to set yourself up for a lot of disappointment and give yourself a lot of poor expectations. So that's why I'm comfortable just um, letting you know what I think is real and not real, and hopefully my reasoning can. You heard Louise sneeze. She's got allergies. These are good microphones. You can pick that up. Um, yeah, so it's important to hear why someone may or may not believe something, and then you can hear what I have to say and say, okay, that I agree with what Drew is saying, or I don't agree with what Drew is saying, and it helps you believe or not believe certain reports. We pay $120 a month or something like that. Oh gosh, gross. That's terrible. Does Apple even care about gaming? Yes, just not the type of gaming you want them to care about. Because Apple's in the far more profitable sector of gaming, which is the mobile gaming sector. They make far more money than Steam. They make more money than Epic. They make more money than probably even Microsoft or Sony makes on gaming, because um, the majority of revenue generated in gaming is in the mobile sector, not the AAA gaming sector of PCs and consoles. So they make a crap ton of money. Um, they make a crap ton of money off of gaming. It's just not AAA gaming. Uh, I know that sucks for you to admit that Clash of Clans is more profitable than Elden Ring, but that's the reality of the situation. So they care about the part of the gaming market that makes money. Um, anyway, I've got some errands to run and some chores to do, but I appreciate the super chats. I appreciate you all for your excellent questions and for tuning in. I hope you guys have an excellent rest of your day. I hope you're as excited for Quadruple UDC as I am. And take care, all. Have a great day. Bye bye.